I began with a landscape canvas and the rule of thirds grid. I then began to paint abstract forms on the canvas. I had no plan other than to respond to that rule of thirds grid. I approached this piece as I would do if I was doing a landscape image based on the rule of thirds. I was left with a simple abstract with good composition, although I knew that the piece was unfinished. The piece was balanced as a composition, but the moment I rotated the image it became very unbalanced. This would be horrible if it was a finished composition, but as part of the process it's exciting for an artist. If a canvas lacks balance, it creates opportunity because we can respond to the imbalance. By placing the diamond guide above it, I could immediately see how the composition was unbalanced and how to rectify it. This gave me the opportunity to respond to the diamond guide and the shapes and colours that were already present on the canvas. This pushes the artist to be more fluid and adaptive. It is easier to create a good composition if you have a solid plan from the beginning, but that can lead to something predictable. You can learn more and you can create something more interesting if you plan for twists and turns. Create a few obstacles for yourself and see how well you can respond and adapt to those challenges. The diamond guide suggested there should be more elements on the central line, so I placed some dark blue shapes in those areas and I also added some more yellow. There was also nothing on the right vertical line, so I placed some dark red abstract forms loosely around that line. I placed a light blue shape along the horizontal line. I wasn't sure if I was going to use the horizontal line in this particular composition, and at this stage I wanted to leave my options open. I placed another light blue shape on the top of the left vertical, and I placed another along one of those diagonal lines at the bottom of the canvas. I knew the piece was still unfinished. Knowing when a piece like this is finished can be difficult. Its creation is tied to the process, and sometimes you can get so caught up in the process you cease to stop and think about your artwork. There should always be time to pause and analyse the artwork. Stop. Ask yourself, is this the time to make a change, or is it time to develop the vertical composition to conclusion? Is this the time to choose whether the canvas should be vertical, portrait format, or horizontal, landscape format? When I looked at this image, I felt that I was probably halfway through, so I decided to rotate the canvas again. I rotated it back to its original position, although that wasn't my only option. I could have rotated it the other way for a change, but I felt that because this was my first demonstration of using both the diamond guide and the rule of thirds together, I wouldn't make things too complicated by rotating it to a different position every time. As an artist, it is good to place obstacles for ourselves, but we want to decide how big those obstacles are. When rotating the canvas, it will be easier if you're only using one vertical position and one horizontal position. Because the canvas has 4 sides, we could switch to every side of the canvas, but that would make it harder or more interesting depending on your perspective. Once the canvas was turned, it became unbalanced again. The last parts of my process had moved the piece towards a portrait composition. It still had aspects that suited a landscape image, but they didn't seem as dominant as they were. They had been overpowered by the new shapes and colours. By placing the rule of thirds grid on top, I could analyse the composition and explore my next step. I could identify areas of imbalance and make the landscape composition more dominant. I decided to highlight the right vertical line with an abstract form that is a greyish blue. Then I placed a circle where the left vertical line intersects with the bottom horizontal line. Although the composition overall is beginning to look complex, you might notice that this layer is fairly simplistic. I've isolated this layer from everything else, and you can take a good look at it. This is a simplistic composition. The circle could represent the sun, and this shape on the right could be the trunk of a tree with twisting branches. This is a simple composition and it's fairly common. I've seen photos that use this kind of composition. If you look at this layer in isolation, you might say to yourself, I can do that. Complex compositions are often made of separate pieces that are simplistic when they're viewed on their own. However, the challenge lies in learning how to combine those simplistic elements. This is why we learn about composition, and this is why we expose ourselves to new ideas. The image was beginning to look more complex, but I still didn't feel that it was complete. I decided to rotate the image once more. There is no set number of times the image can be rotated. You should experiment and go with the flow. You might worry that you could go too far and then end up with an image that is cluttered with too much detail. This is nothing to fear because it isn't a problem. You can always simplify an abstract piece of artwork by creating some large blocks of colour. This might feel difficult for you because it means covering up parts of your artwork. It might seem drastic, but sometimes it's necessary. Creativity is a process that requires acts of destruction. As you can see, I needed more elements along that central line. At this stage, I'm really focusing on finalising the composition. My approach is altered by that knowledge because I'm preparing to finish this piece of artwork. Once I had those purple circles along the central line, I was faced with a nice balanced composition, and I knew that my next step wasn't rotating the canvas or adding large abstract forms. This was the time to respond to the canvas in smaller ways and add some finishing touches. But first, I wanted to add some white. It was a constant process of adding more colour, and when I got close to the end, I knew that I would need to bring some white back to the canvas. Balancing a composition is also a question of balancing light and dark on your canvas. Structurally, the image is interesting, but it needed more of a range of light and shade. So I began with white and then I added some detail in black. The black and white really add a punch to the image. It was that final layer of detail that the piece needed. I had created a piece of artwork using both the rule of thirds and the diamond guide.